All right, everybody, how we doing? Got a good one for you today. We hop into the Discord. Anybody who wants to come chat, just jump in, as always. Um, so today, um, taking a look at this video, there's an interview between Neil deGrasse Tyson and Ben Shapiro talking about transgenderism in general. They go at a few different aspects of it, but I'm actually watching somebody else's reaction to it. So this is this channel, Mr. L Boyd reacts, and I watched this already a while ago, and I'm gonna watch it back and kind of react live. Um, but I really like engaging with this because it seems like he's a little bit more of like a normie on these issues. He's not, in these spaces where people are um, just kind of spewing out fully formed, rehearsed opinions. He seems like he's coming at it at just kind of a more like, more normal perspective maybe compared to more kind of terminally online people. So I'm curious to see what kind of things that Neil deGrasse Tyson says or that Ben Shapiro says that resonate with him, and just the kind of arguments they could make that seem like, oh, okay, that's pretty straightforward, that makes sense, that seems reasonable, and what things seem more kind of out there, or like, okay, well, I would need a lot more clarifying about that. It's a good way to gauge, where people are on a topic, is to see somebody watching a reaction between. I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson is much more of a normie than Ben Shapiro when it comes to these kinds of talks and arguments. Um, but yeah, let's take a look, and I think there's some papers cited, so maybe I'll try to look those up midway through if we can get specific source. But anyway, let's jump in.
All right, so this is a suggestion via Discord, guys. The name of the video is Neil deGrasse Tyson's Thoughts on Transgenderism. And so I'm guessing this video is being suggested after the last video we just encountered, with him basically arguing with a couple of other scientists on the stage and kind of freaking out.
Oh, this is interesting. Okay, I should look up that as well because that sounds pretty interesting. Talking to other scientists rather than talking to Ben Shapiro.
Even though playingly, keep this in mind. Then, obviously, in the comments, everyone was kind of like, I lost all respect for Neil deGrasse Tyson because of this. And so then
Yeah, I mean, just to say, it's unbelievable um, how fair weather fans people are when it comes to, oh my God, this person said one good thing about trans people. Oh my God, I saw this person drinking a Bud Light. They were my favorite artist since I was a little kid, and now I hate them. It's kind of unbelievable to me how radicalized people are. I mean, I don't know if those people are, people who are really kind of terminally online, so they're jumping into this like all the time, or um, yeah. Hey, Marcellus Wallace.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good.
Have we
What
chatted
about you?
before? I don't recognize or remember your name, but my memory's not great.
I don't know. I don't know. My memory also not current. You know?
Okay. Did you have some kind of particular, engagement with this topic, or just kind of curious?
No, I'm curious.
Okay.
Um,
That sounds great. Oh,
yeah.
here, let me stream this into the Discord so that you can watch it kind of live instead of it would be delayed if you were going through the stream. So here we go. Can get all that. But yeah, at any moment, if you want me to pause, you've got some thoughts, whatever, yeah, just let me know.
Okay.
and obviously the suggestions for this video starts popping up because I have not seen it, right? Um, but let's go and check this out. Let's see where this takes us, guys.
I like his
It
intro.
seems like the left is militating against the
And really quickly, guys, so this is Ben Shapiro. I think I've encountered him one time, other than
Right. So this is somebody who's pretty new to Ben Shapiro, probably new to this content. So this is like a great person to see just how they're interacting with this kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
intense debater on the subject.
This. Okay. Let's get it.
It seems like the left is militating against the
left.
advent of science. One of those.
So
The left is militating against the advent of science, and this guy's immediately, okay, interesting. What's the left? What do you mean by the left?
I'm guessing he's on the right.
Yeah.
The left.
Oh, please, yeah.
First of all, round to the bat. I'm a Libyan, by the way. I was following the American politics since 2013, right?
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So the left is entitled to anyone, you know. The left is not a group. The left is not like someone like it. The left don't own anything, you know.
Yeah.
You can prescribe yourself as an individual, you know, as a left, you know. But like this is like, you know, the left is not a group. It's not like a club.
It's not a party. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
actually
It's not
a
a club.
tendencies. You know, it's actually tendencies that prescribed by individuals that pronounced or how you perceived, you know. It's kind of like if you want to use Jude Butler, you know, argument for gender, right? It's kind of like how you perceived, you know.
Yeah.
There's no like something that is like leftist group or something like that. As a Libyan leftist, like I don't believe in this like crap, you know, that there is a leftist group, that leftist cabal, these kind of things, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is something that I mean, there's always infighting on the left of who's a true leftist. There's always we're leftists, not liberals. Whatever, these kind of things come up, or people on the right saying, oh, you know, liberals are leftists. So the way that people are categorizing each other from every different perspective is always a source of argument.
Yeah. For example, like a figure in, let's say a figure on the left, right? Like I'm a leftist Libyan, but I view some leftist, I don't know, in America, are right wing for me in
Sure.
foreign policy,
Yeah.
right? Like for example, like Brianna Wu, right? Brianna Wu is a neocon for me because like her position is on Israel Palestine is actually like not adequate, right? I decide that is not adequate. I make the judgment, right? If you want to use Kantian like language, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. The big thing, if I had one crusade that I would make when it comes to defining lefty, I don't really know how to, you know, prescribe this for right wingers. They have to make up their own kind of moral compass. But for lefties, the one thing that I would crusade against is this conception of people who are left and what it means to go further left. Because generally when I hear somebody saying somebody is further left, it just means that they are less nuanced. It means that they're louder. It means that they're more aggressive. It means that they are more willing to maybe insult. So somebody who's willing to just or be more hyperbolic. So somebody who's saying, you know, I want to annihilate capitalism right now. Does this make, you know, are they more of a leftist than somebody like shoot, what was her name? I'm trying to think of the presidential candidate who said I'm a capitalist in my bones. You know, but she's done a lot of like banking reform.
Kristen Cinema?
No, oh my God. I came straight from work and my brain is mush. She was running against Bernie in the primaries in
Elizabeth
Warren, right? She's somebody who's done like really pretty impressive reform of capital and fighting for consumer rights and fighting against big banking and antitrust. But she said, you know, I'm dyed in my wool capitalist. But somebody who goes on Twitter and says, I'm currently working in some kind of invisible way to dismantle capitalism right now, they would be a far leftist. And I reject this conception of you can simply make a statement and that puts you further on the left or the right. I think it's worth looking at action. I think it's worth looking at what kinds of statements you can make that have some kind of concreteness to them. So saying, I think that we could move to a new system that would be like this. So conceptualizing something past capitalism or
Yeah.
critiquing capitalism, those are the kinds of meaningful leftist exercises that I consider valid. But somebody being more
Mm.
hyperbolic and saying, I hate capitalism this much, to me doesn't make somebody more left. That's the one thing I would rail against
Yeah, yeah.
as a
Uh,
categorization.
for me, I read the book that entirely like changed my life in terms
Mm,
of how I view the left and right divide. Like there's a German philosopher, not Marx, but another German philosopher called Albert Hirschman,
okay.
right? He published a book called The Rhetoric of Reaction,
Rhetoric
right?
of
100 years
reaction.
of
Okay.
reactionary politics,
Mm,
right? He actually like you know outline what's the tendencies that compel a leftist to be a conservative, right?
mm,
What is these tendencies? These are three tendencies, right? Perversity thesis, jeopardy thesis, and futility thesis.
mm,
If you throughout perverse effect, right,
hmm.
start to argue for the futility of something or
Yeah.
futility of a or progression or futility of like some community that needs some progression or system or structure that
Hmm.
if you start to argue for the futility of it, for me, you mean that you're on the right?
Hmm.
It's like kind of arguing, it's kind of true perverse effect. You argue for like you have these perversity, in yourself or perverse effects that you have in yourself, and you want to jeopardize the progression of some like movements or some like libertarian movements, right? Socially speaking, and you kind of argue for the futility of
Hmm.
politically in the body politics,
Yeah.
right? That's my view of how I perceive conservatives.
Hmm. Right. It's the people who say, who was the senator, Dianne Feinstein maybe, who was saying, look, I know about fighting for climate change. I've been fighting for climate change for 30 years, whatever, in the Senate. But it's like, okay, what have you done? What do you have to show for it? So there's the people who say, look, it's not possible. I've tried, and then you say, but what have you tried? How have you tried?
Uh,
Um,
like for example, these deep dipshits who argue for the conservative dipshits in
mhm.
American politics, who argue for IQ, as
Yep.
a measurement or intelligent,
Hmm.
right? So they argue for that based not on like they want like people to be smart,
Hmm.
but based on something more, They argue for that as a pretext, a perverse effect. They argue for this perverse effect as a way to kind of like argue for the futility of some black communities that
Hmm.
are kind of
Yeah.
like
They
what
say
want
they
like
say don't
change material
try because
things.
it's impossible. They say don't
Yeah,
even.
because
Yeah.
there are not their
Hmm.
IQ results, proving that
Hmm.
percentage, proving that the blacks are unable to get educated or unable to improve themselves, like the Asian community or this kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's why some deep shits among conservatives
Hmm.
argue for like the model, the Asian community,
Hmm.
the big model in America, the immigrants that are like successful now.
Hmm.
That's some of conservative arguments.
Yeah.
There's a
So
lot
yeah,
of them.
social Darwinism exactly. Well, here
Yeah,
I want to get on
yeah,
through the video because we could
yeah.
definitely
Sorry,
and feel
sorry.
free to come back and we can do like a full.
Yeah,
I mean, there's always so much to talk about when it comes to theory.
yeah,
Yeah.
Left is militating against the advent of science. One of those areas is the area of transgenderism. The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that
Yeah, and so I mean, initially this is a stronger position than I think almost anyone would say. Um, I think just to the the kind of nearer argument is just that sex and gender are not entirely the same. That would be the starting point, and then we could say how far. Okay,
yeah,
are they totally separable? I don't know, maybe, but can they be separable? Okay, so there's like very simple arguments. So it's like, okay, how much has our our biology changed when it comes to our sex chromosomes or our sexual dimorphisms in the last like 2,000 years. Has that changed that much? I don't know. Has the ways that humans dress are the ways, or even just, right now today, sex is not so different, or, sexual status, male and female across the world is not super different, but the way that people interact in society is really different. The ways that people interact in Japan versus the ways that people interact in Israel, or the ways that people interact in France, or the ways that people interact in the United States, the clothing that people wear, whether people wear, whether men wear unbifurcated clothing, robes, or kilts that in the United States would be considered skirts and would be considered feminine, but they're masculine in other countries. Well, surely this says something about how there's some difference between gender and sex. So Ben is starting with like the furthest possible point that you could take this argument from, which is obviously going to be the easiest to argue against. So that makes sense from his perspective for him to do that.
Yeah.
That it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage.
And he's saying compete with, he's saying in terms of sports. So he's going again to probably the most contentious, one of the most disputed kind of scenarios, which is really not, it's not kind of an everyday situation for most people.
Because sorry if I
please,
interject a little
please,
bit,
go ahead.
but like using the perversity thesis, that's what I'm like arguing for. Using a perverse effect to argue for the futility. That's the point of conservatism. At the end of the day, Edmund Burke, which is an Irish philosopher, was a liberal, right? He was a liberal at the end of the day, but he argued for the futility at that time of the rights of man, right? Do you remember in the French Revolution when some bureaucrats, liberal bureaucrats, argue for the rights of man, and he objected. Edmund Burke was part of the Whigs at that time, and he objected to that. He objected to that wholeheartedly, right? And he became the first conservative and the founding father of the philosophy of conservatism. I don't know what his perversity thesis or his perverse effect that led him to that. Like, case in point is the same for Ben Shapiro.
If we recognize this group of people, it creates this difficulty in society that is going to be tough to resolve. It's just not worth it. Let's just scrap the whole existence of these people.
Yeah,
that's basically
he by that he creating an effect, conservative creating an effect by jeopardizing the progression, jeopardizing the progression of a given community. Right? They do it also, unfortunately, they do it also to their own community, right? Whether you're a black conservative or black Asian or Mexican Latino conservative, or Muslim conservative,
Yeah.
Biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to opine.
Yeah, so that was a bit of a confused ending there. He seemed
Yeah.
It was a little bit of a word salad. He's saying it should be based on data, but it should be specifically this data that says this thing, which is kind of a simplified view of how biology works. And then he acknowledges that it's not quite that way, but actually those are birth defects. So that's kind of a perverse thing itself, to use the framework you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't even think of that as part of like the whole thing. So he seemed like he wasn't even quite sure where he wanted to end up. But that was his opening statement. I think that was like a decent, 6, 7 out of 10 opening statement.
Opine on this.
I'll call that fair. His statement here, fair.
This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender.
Okay. Yeah.
Otherwise, why do you even give a shit?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
What someone identifies with. We live in a free country,
Okay.
and
Yeah, and I like that Neil. I mean, we'll see like how this proceeds, but he's just totally biting the bullet on going ahead with. I mean, Ben Shapiro took the strongest, furthest definition of not even transgenderism, but just like sociology. Period. To argue against, and then he took kind of the most controversial or the most kind of disputed territory, because all the other territory is just like there's really not much to dispute that trans people do
Yeah,
exist, that everything phenomenological is just there's really nothing to say. He took kind of the only disputed thing really, and Neil's like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Here's why that perverse thing. So actually, it's great. So what he's saying is that the perversity, Ben, that you're talking about is actually just a symptom of some deeper perversity, and that's what we should be examining: the perversity of segregating sports by sex or by gender.
yeah,
So he's taking away that perversity from the trans community and putting it onto just society at large. He's saying this is no longer your burden to bear, that's a great way
yeah.
of doing that. Yeah.
With consenting adults and people free expression of who and what they are.
I mean, on an adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter.
Okay, interesting. So he's already conceded on an adult level, and let's see what he means. Does he mean like 18 plus, or because people in colleges are 18 plus usually? Sometimes they're 17, but most people in college
Yeah.
are 18 plus. So is he conceding most of it, or
Matter what you teach
That's
to
what I'm
children.
saying. And so
what you teach to children? I mean, should we teach? So now it's unclear even what that comeback is. Is that should we teach to children that we should segregate sports, or I assume he means about trans stuff, but
there's
it's
the
kind of unclear.
the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves,
As we tell ourselves.
Strong
people's
challenge.
freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all.
This statement also is extremely fair, excessively logical, because we live in a free country. They have the freedom to do exactly whatever they decide. When it comes to the sport thing, though, it's always kind of rubbed me oddly, but I would definitely say that it most likely should be a third league, if anything, just so not to like disadvantage other people, like specifically that are trying to also compete.
Yeah, so I mean, so this is something that's been proposed. It probably, I mean, there's no way to not inconvenience somebody, right? If what we're talking about, I mean, really, what it comes down to that people get upset about are awards just for the glory, whatever, and scholarships. Those are like the two things. And if there's only 1,000 scholarships, you can slice it different ways, and you could try to make it more fair, but people who are born more athletic are going to be winning athletic competitions. People who are taller, people who have a faster respiratory rate, people with differently shaped hands. If you look at Michael Phelps, this dude has so many different mutations that are just like
Yeah, the swimmer in.
yeah. I think his hands or feet are like slightly webbed, or they're just like shaped in a way that's like excellent for swimming. The rate at which he like respires, just his like carrying oxygen level is just drastically higher than like a typical human. Not even in terms of like his training, but just his like genetic background. It's unfair that he's competing, but he's just not a targeted person when it comes to who are the people that we check in terms of, is it fair that you're this good? It's mostly like black women get the biggest brunt of the targeting. Your testosterone is too high, but they would never say, okay, Michael Phelps, your testosterone is too high. They never even test that. That's never a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, but you have a point here, like in terms of the sports, chess is a sport, a
Yeah.
chess game is a sport. Why you don't allow trans women to enter with men in a chess? It's not a physical like exercise. It's a mental exercise, which everyone like can play chess, like everyone like can have the freedom to play chess. Other things, other like sports that are, don't have like physical, you know, physical
Yeah.
capability or something like that.
So the argument that I've heard, so the argument that I heard Jordan Peterson make is that if you look at um, the width of the distribution, so if you look at how skewed distributions are, or for men or women, just how broad the tails are, like women are more tightly clustered with certain traits. So traits like IQ, I'll just believe him that these are like factually accurate statements. You know, whether they translate to something meaningful, I don't know. But I'll trust him that this is what the data shows. That like the women of IQ is more clustered. The IQ for men is more broad. So there's more outliers. Those outliers are thicker on the low end and the high end.
Yeah.
And for chess, chess is one of the few things where IQ actually does correlate really well with performance. And so
Yeah.
there's more men who just have like a very, very high IQ. So it's not that men on average are better IQ, but the people who are really good are skewed toward being men. That's an argument that I understand. I don't know if any of that is true, but that's an argument that I understand, and it would make sense of that situation. You know, for something like chess, if that's the case. But again, the premise is even deeper than what Neil deGrasse Tyson is talking about. The premise about sports is it fair, right? And okay, if men and women have different IQ distributions for sports, so you separate it out. So you know the women's category isn't kind of polluted with men who are in this kind of skew. You know, have a capacity to be drawn from this distribution that has like a fatter tail of high IQ. Yeah, maybe that's kind of more fair. But it's like, okay, well, if we wanted to make it fair, then we would divide your performance by your IQ or something. We would just correct for it. If we really wanted to make it fair, because it should be about your like effort that you put into training or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But we say
Yeah.
like, oh, this person is gifted with this natural talent, and that's okay. But if you're trans, it's not okay. So there's just
not-
certain
yeah.
things that we pick and choose as like this is fair, this isn't fair, and at the end of the day, ultimately, those are going to be arbitrary. It's a question of what people feel like is okay or is not okay, is
Yeah.
sportsmanly or
It's
or
kind
not
of
sportsmanly.
performative.
It's kind of performative. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay?
Well-
This is for their own freedoms,
Well-
because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved. And
And I love that, where I mean, Neil just kind of shuts him. He sees that Ben went in on this very particular thing, because that's really the only thing that I don't know what else you can argue that, you know, if you're talking about certain drug treatments for kids, like that's again kind of contentious territory. But other than that, it's really just sports as something contentious. Anything else, there's not a lot of data that you could back yourself up with. But he's seeing that Ben went in on that, and he's saying, okay, this one's kind of contentious. Obviously, nothing else is. And Ben kind of lost all steam up to that point. He's like, yeah, really, this is the only thing that we have, you know, to argue about when it comes to trans people. Everything else is like a non-issue.
It's kind of fascinating for me that Ben, who's like a libertarian, kind of argue for the government to
Oh, of course,
take
yeah.
take all the kids, the intersex kids and the people like the kids, the transgender kids, taking them from their parents, and he's a libertarian, and arguing for that is actually an extension to conservative value that he has. At the end of the day, he will kind of like take the position of the futility and futilize that you cannot have like trans kids, you know, and the government have the right to do that. That's like a
The
lot of
government should
libertarians
step in and stop doctors from doing medical treatment on kids who need them.
Yeah.
That's his argument
Yeah.
as a libertarian. So,
Yeah.
I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but in general, my perception of libertarians is that they're just kind of cowardly conservatives.
Yeah.
It's something they stand behind. So it's like, I don't want the government involved in this, but I do want it involved in this. So they pick and
Yeah.
choose. It's that phrase. I think this is from maybe Les Miserables. The law in its ever abiding wisdom and equality doesn't allow beggars or kings to sleep under bridges.
Yeah, you read Michel Foucault. You read Michel Foucault. A good politician a good politician binds the people by their own ideas, right? That's the whole thing about the Discipline and Punishment by Michel Foucault. It's he quoted it from Savant, a French jurist, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Follow that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and just the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports.
And so, so the difference there is that...
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, and he's doing a great job because he's kind of just... He's not really letting Ben Shapiro talk because he's making both arguments. As soon as Ben was about to come in with a counter, Neil's like, no, I got the counter here. Got it. I got the whole thing laid out for you. Don't worry about it. You don't even... Just sit back, relax. Let me tell you how it is. The thing with steroids is it's a moral panic, right? If I use steroids but you don't, I have an advantage. So you kind of have to use steroids. Everybody now has to use steroids. And so it becomes this issue where it's not even just people who want to use steroids because they just have that burning desire to get the edge. Now people all have to use steroids just to get to status quo. And now everybody's getting all these, health side effects and people using more steroids, which is something that somebody who is really good at metering out, how to use steroids and what steroids to use to get more performance, that is a skill. But we've decided that that's not a skill that's sportsmanly. We think you should be training and upping your cardio and upping your technique for that specific sport. We don't think you should be getting really good at tuning steroids, that should be a factor. And that's fine. I think that's a very reasonable thing. But to apply that moral panic to trans people, what they say is it's like, well, I mean, literally Ben Shapiro is starring in a film that is taking that argument and they made it into a they would describe it as a comedy. It's kind of a horror show when I watch the trailer. But it's basically saying like, oh, well then men could just pretend to be trans and live as a woman and take hormones for years. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Are there a lot of athletes who would really fully transition, live as a woman, take hormones for years so that their testosterone and estrogen levels match that which is required by sports leagues in order to play as in a women's league? Would anybody do this? They're saying everybody would do this, when in reality, I would think almost nobody would do this.
It's kind of
if
like
anybody.
it's kind of like these
what
are,
they're saying is just put on a wig and you're a woman, but that's not how it works right now.
I think like even gym, the regular people that practice gym, right? I ask a lot of doctors because I'm a dentist, right?
Oh, cool.
And I ask a lot of doctors, a lot of doctors said to me like there's no effects on like taking steroid, like there's no effects or there's no effects on your health. You just like will develop like your structure will change, will like if you take like testosterone, your structure you change. Sometimes gym people who exist in gym, they start to have their some kind of physical change, like some kind of like their pardon my French, their ass become big, their rib and these kind of things, and there's no effects, harmful effects. the conservative, when they espouse this shit, show me a scientific, like, treatise that is harmful. All the scientific community, even in conservative, countries, agreed that, like, testosterone and, like, prostrogene and estrogen is actually not harmful at all, you know? And it's depend on your genes, it's like it depends on your genes, but, like, it's not harmful. It can change your bone structure, right? It can change, like, thickening your bone structure, but, like, it's not, like, harmful at all, you know? Yeah, I think it's a bullshit idea, I think it's he's like, talking about perversities. He kind of, like, you know, produce perversities, That's it.
Yeah, so it's something that no one would do, and even if they did, it wouldn't be harmful.
Yeah, yeah.
because it gives you an undue advantage.
Right.
So, and I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormonal.
Yeah, that's kind of an issue here because
Yeah.
there are like plenty of mainly runners, and specifically ones that are
Oh, this
coming
guy
from
even
out of
knows. Yeah.
the United States of America. There are people who are in fact intersex, and their hormonal balances are kind of out of whack at times, right? So if you do this, this may actually just completely like remove like intersex people.
I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, so let's say you're intersex, or just you're not intersex, but just your hormone balances between whatever those thresholds are for men or women. I guess, like, you have to take some hormone suppressor, or you get to take more hormones to get into one category or another. I mean, it seems like a less unfair system. Because the alternative is, it's like we have people who are competing as women, but then they're like, oh, they're too fast and they're black, so let's test their testosterone level. Oh, it's too high. They have to take hormone suppressors, even though they're not even intersex. They just have higher testosterone and they're a woman. It's like, okay, well, we don't ever say that men have to do that. It's just women, and it seems like usually just black women.
That's weird. That's weird argument, by the way. That's one of the perversities that
Yeah.
I've been for like 4 years trying to, like, you know argue that, like, this is a perversity, perversity thesis that the conservatives try to argue for and try to jeopardize. I don't know what they try to do, but for the sake of not, like, transgender people playing in the sport, they do that. They jeopardize this,
And
unfortunately.
it's this thing. I mean, this phenomena of people who are gatekeeping womanhood from trans women will always end up gatekeeping womanhood from women. They always will, and they don't seem to care. They say, "Oh,
Yeah, definitely.
if you don't have a womb, you're not a woman. We don't care if that casts out women who have had hysterectomies. Oh, if your testosterone is high, you're not a woman. It doesn't matter that you are cis. You were born a woman. You were assigned at birth a woman.
Yeah,
Doesn't
it's
matter
kind
if
of
we
like
kick you out."
it's
Yeah.
kind of like the previous argument with the black community, right? In terms of the IQ, it's kind of the same. They do the same thing, the same old, old and what you called in America, old song and dance, the same thing, They do the same thing, That's conservatism, American conservatism, brain
From
rot. That's it.
Yeah.
certain things. Like there was one pretty recently, a female runner. She was from Africa,
Yep,
and this
this is
happened
exactly-
to her. Right, I know that. Also, think about young girls and boys. That would also be extremely interesting to do. Guys.
It's a thought I had. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to land.
And I mean, I love the way that Neil has framed this, where it's just like, yeah, you're right. This is kind of an issue. Like, we don't know exactly how to solve this right now. Yeah. Rather than the kind of panic that Ben would love to put into it and the kind of blame that he would love to put into it. This is a huge problem that has to be resolved now, and it's because of trans people. And Neil is saying, yeah, this stuff is an issue. you're right. It's an issue for trans people. It's an issue for all people, and we don't know exactly how to resolve it right now. It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. So he's totally deflated all of the panic and
Yeah.
all of the blame that Ben wants to put into it.
The
But,
WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be you'd have to find some way.
And it's interesting. So the other thing is, there's a massive effect of just who you train with. If you train with people who are really good, you'll become way better. If you train with people who aren't as good, you won't be as good. People who are athletes don't seem to be able to do much better than the people they train with. So it's this thing where, like, somebody who runs the fastest ever, next year everybody's running that time.
Yeah.
And so
I was working in a gym, back in the old days, in 2017, 2016. And like there's multiple techniques, in terms of like, powerlifting, right? So sometimes some technique is better than other technique. It depends on the person. It depends on how the performability, how you perceive yourself, right? So yeah, yeah, that's it. It's depend on the technique of powerlift. It doesn't have any relation to anything.
Yeah, and there are average differences between when you're looking at something like lifting, where it really is like raw strength. There clearly are differences between men and women on average, but certainly when it comes to something like basketball, where technique, team coordination, things like this are huge factors. I would imagine, I don't have any strong data to back this up, maybe I can find some, but I would imagine that the fact that we've segregated these sports, and they're segregated from a pretty young age, contributes to the divergent level of performance between men and women. I would imagine that it would be more similar if people could just train together. And it's interesting looking at the scenarios where so I was reading something. I wonder if I can find this again quickly, but the actual just history, the real history of sports, like collegiate sports in America, is basically that women weren't allowed to play at all. They wanted to play with the men.
Yeah.
They beat the men. The men didn't like it. The women eventually had their own leagues so that they could play at all, because playing sports was considered unladylike. And for like 100 years that women have even been allowed to play sports in colleges, or maybe less than that, they've been segregated because everything has been segregated when it comes to men and women and colleges.
Yeah.
And they've just been kept out for so long. And in many cases, when they do compete, they do sometimes beat the men. And so this kind of hysteria around, you just can't have men and women compete because women will just get demolished all the time. I'm not so convinced that that's just a hard and fast rule of nature. And I don't think that the data supports that. I don't think that a kind of retrospective historical analysis supports that. I think it's, at the very least, it's much messier. I'm not saying positively that, you can just throw men and women together and in 40 years it'll all be sorted out. But I don't think it's clear that that can't happen.
Yeah,
That's where I'm at.
Even Jude, sorry, even Jude Butler, like kind of her argument, like we kind of like to put you in perspective, like she said, like biological science is a recent knowledge, right? You know, and like there's the gender, that the categories, and who knows historically what is the category. Maybe there's categories like not men and women, there's other categories, right? So we kind of like make we make sex gendered, right? We kind of like through perverse mean, like we did that, right? And I think similar to your point. I think like we make sex gendered, and we kind of forgot like the that and we projected some kind of a gender, like in terms of our philosophers. Like you tend to see philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau talk to all humans, right? You know, talk to human, you know, as man, as the purview or perspective of man, you know, because in your gender, your own gender, you follow your perception, you know, your perception carry your gender, right? And Jude Butler said, like, we before biological sex or biology, we kind of like projected everything to like gender. We projected it to nature, right? We kind of like projected to nature. But she argued for the controversial, you know, thing. Her conclusion is that like there's no gender from the start, right? I agree that like there's some kind of like separation. She said like I agree that there's some kind of separation between sex and gender. That's like, you know, that's I agree there's some separation, but there's no gender from the start. We have been projecting gender to nature, right? To the nature, to nature. And that's like that's her like conclusion from Gender Trouble, uh,
Yeah.
her book, you know?
Right. That woman is nature.
Yeah,
Man is humankind, and humankind's
yeah,
whatever desire to
mm,
conquer nature
yeah.
is like
Like, yeah,
superimposed onto a desire to control women.
like for example, Thomas Hobbes, an English philosopher, right? He wrote in the English Civil War during Charles the First and the Parliament feud, right? He argued for the misogynist idea, you know, part of my French, is that in the state of nature. So he was the founding father of liberalism and social contractarianism, right? In a nutshell, right? He argued that like that in the state of nature. So a state of nature is a state where you have the right to everything. There's no institutions. There's no law that you know everything left to his own. He called it like the state of nasty and brutish and short. A state of nature is nasty and brutish and short. You know, like if someone steals from you, he has the right because and you have the right to like to kill him and this kind of thing. He said like that women in the state of nature have the right to everything, right? But in able to form the state, you know, he's the founding father, by the way, of the state, you know, and political modern political science, you know. He said like in able to women, because given that women have the right to everything, right? How about women surrender the right to everything, right? Because they are the founders of the Commonwealth, right? And men be the like men be the owner of like of their kids and their children, because he believed in his like perverse mind that men in a state of nature, they cannot recognize their children, right? He cannot recognize their children. So to his logic, right, that women can surrender, because he believed that in a state of nature women have the right to their kid, women have the right to kids, right? But due to that, she can surrender her right to everything to form the state or the commonwealth. And that's a misogynist idea. And he
Interesting. Yeah.
was cooked, you know, by a later theorist, right?
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
To compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports area.
Yeah, tell me.
Okay, look, yeah. So now Ben's trying to broaden. He's saying like, okay, I'm not really making progress on this, and also I don't like the idea that you've boxed me out of being able to argue for anything else. So let me see if I can get another thing in here. Okay.
Oh, no.
So it would be, you talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about.
Yeah. And so, yeah. So before they swap out of sports, I want to just quickly bring up, probably the strongest thing that's ever been argued against trans people being in sports, or the most like kind of popular argument. You've heard of the swimmer Leah Thomas, right?
Never heard of her.
Just bring up. Yeah, let me see. So this is a person. This is like every chain mail, whatever that's sent around. That's just like, oh, trans people obviously don't deserve it, to be in sports. She's just like sweeping so many awards away from real women, real girls who deserve them. Obviously, this is a man. These are the kind of like awful things that have been said, and the kind of like, okay, here's the clear cut case of why we can't have trans women comporting in leagues with cis women because they just dominate. She took all the awards. This is what they're saying. If you look at the career, so okay, so after she transitioned, after hormone replacement therapy, so she was competing in the men's team. Competing in the women's team. Now competing in the women's team, she came 5th in 200 freestyle, 1st in 500 freestyle, 8th in 1650 freestyle, and she was ranked 89th among male college swimmers. But okay, so she came in 5th, 1st, and 8th. So before she transitioned, on the men's team, as a man, 6th fastest national men's time. Where are these? What order are these in? Okay. 2nd in the men's 500, 1,000, and 1,600. So she came in freshman year, recorded time of 8 minutes, ranked 6th fastest men's time, I guess, ever. Freestyle that ranked within the national top 100. So she finished 2nd in like all 3 versus whatever it was, like 6th. What was it? 6th, 1st, and having trouble reading this. 5th, 1st, and 8th. So 5th, 1st, and 8th after transitioning, and 2nd, 2nd, 2nd before transitioning. Same person competing. So she was at she was just at the top when she started freshman year, and then she lost muscle mass and strength through testosterone suppression, hormone replacement therapy. Her time in the 500 freestyle is over 15 seconds slower than her personal best before medically transitioning. Drop in times. And then, so while she was transitioning and she lost muscle mass and she was competing in the men's category, her times dropped. And then she swapped to the women's category and they shot up, of course. But if you look at pre-transition and post-transition, it's kind of par for the course. She was at the top and now she's still like kind of near the top. So this was the gold standard for what conservatives, reactionaries were holding up as this is the dead to rights case of why we cannot have trans women competing in women's sports, and it's just not true. It's just factually like a lie. It's not the case that she went from being kind of mediocre to dominating. She went from dominating to mediocre while she was transitioning and still in the men's team and losing muscle mass to back to dominating when she was, competing as a woman after having hormone replacement therapy. So it's just, it feels like it boggles the mind. When you look into it, it's like, what's the strongest case they can make? And it's a perfect case against what they're saying. If you just actually look at the data, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I saw this woman on the picture.
Mm-hmm.
This woman, no. This woman here, the second, I think. No. On your left, I think. On your
On my left.
This, yeah. There's this picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, could you? Yeah, this woman on the right of her.
Oh,
there's.
yeah. Was that the girl
Yeah.
that was upset? I know there was some girl who was like, yeah.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
tied, I guess.
I remember I saw this, talking about like and complaining and this kind of thing. She joined the conservative movement, by the way. She
Yeah.
joined the conservative
because
movement.
she came in second with somebody who, or tied with somebody who's been like coming in first and second. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I
She,
raced Leah Thomas and I lost, or I didn't win. I didn't beat her. I
yeah,
raced somebody and I didn't win, and that's an injustice. Okay, I
yeah,
mean, if you feel that way, I guess, everybody's entitled to their feelings, but there's no factual basis for that. Takes eighth
yeah,
place. Eighth place. She's been taking second place. She took eighth place. But
yeah.
this
I
isn't
mean,
this isn't anything.
I mean, that's the conservative. They think that in their own ideology, um, uh, ideology critique, they think that they telling the hard truth, right? The
Hmm.
hard, uncomfortable truth. But it's not uncomfortable truth.
It's just
You
a
you
lie.
you literally, yeah, it's a lie. It's you making a perverse effect in a human sense, in a
Hmm.
human impression sense. You make some kind of perverse effect, and you're trying by your own individual thing, you're trying to justify it
Hmm.
and jeopardize the progression of transgender people. That's it.
Hmm.
That's their work. That's
Yeah.
their why they take money. That's it.
It's entirely motivated reasoning. They have a result.
Yeah,
They'll
and yeah,
pick whatever they can that they think, people aren't going to read past the headline, and for the most part, people don't, and so it works.
yeah,
Yeah.
Science. And right
Yes.
now, children are being taught about the quote unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory based idea.
No, no,
meaning
wait.
that
Wait, hold on.
yeah. Okay.
People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
that's
I don't
that's
get-
that's a social
Yeah, sure.
point, not a scientific point.
It's
Yeah, sure.
You prove
it's-
it, Ben Shapiro. You prove it. That's you're right. You're right. You answer your own question. You answer your own question. You dumb.
Meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
so whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined.
It probably shouldn't be this.
Yeah, whether it's social sciences or natural sciences. I mean, I imagine that he's obviously just arguing in bad faith, because I don't think there's any science like when you're in like fifth grade, you don't necessarily have like natural science and social science. Like you probably just, there's a lot of overlap. It's kind of science
Yeah,
class or language
the
class.
American education system. The American education system is very like bad
Yeah.
on its own. Keep you like he doesn't critique about how curriculum don't teach a lot of content. How about teaching about the American history, very properly, right? And what's happened and who are the figures.
Yeah.
You don't teach that. You teach about General Lee, which and you crowned him to be a best general in the world, and that's what you teach. You don't teach anything in American school. You don't teach like the history of slavery. You don't teach hell. Have you in high school? I don't know. I'm not American, but did you take John Brown? Have you know John Brown
I
in
don't
high
know.
school?
I
Did
don't know
you
what
take
that is. No.
John Brown is before the Civil War. He led the rebellion in I think in Mississippi. I don't know, but he was a Calvinist, religiously speaking, and he led the rebellion, and he fought against General Lee, at the time where people were comfortable, with slavery and these kind of things, right? So these historical things, right? These historical don't tend to teach, in schools, like come on.
Yeah. I mean, Ben's trying to make it sound like it's like, okay, put your microscopes away for a moment. Now I'm going to lecture you about how gender is a spectrum. Like, he's trying to imply something that just doesn't make any sense on its face. Just doesn't happen in reality. Doesn't make sense.
Science class.
Yeah.
But it is a
Sociology.
real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people
Right.
identify how they want to identify.
So
Oh, okay. Well, when he's
Yeah.
not talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson, he will deny that. He will deny that trans people exist, that this is anything other than. He'll probably just say, use words like, "Oh, this is just a mental delusion," right? He never admits when he's not being pressed like this by somebody who has the gravitas to make him balk. He'll never just say like, "Oh yeah, some people are trans."
The question is, what is...
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if you want to say something.
Yeah, but Michel Foucault was right in Discipline and Punishment. Discipline. We live in a discipline and punishment society, right? Where the production of knowledge and calculated knowledge, right? The production of knowledge, production of knowledge is what is power. That's power. Power is not like something power is not for the sake of power, but power is the production of knowledge. Is how to produce knowledge. For example, let have example in the French Revolution when the guillotine invented, right? In the past, there was like a despotic, sovereign who and a person who was responsible of execute you. Now, torture or death penalty now is kind of like it need a watchmaker. That's it. It need someone who a watchmaker. It doesn't pertain to an executioner anymore. There's no person who execute you, right? In the executioner room, or executional scaffold, right? You have a either injection, like death injection, or you have something like with some technology, right? So it's a production of knowledge, right? This is the gist of it, if that
Just a
makes
relate-
sense.
I'm not sure if I 100%. I think firing squad was kind of an interesting, right? The idea behind a firing squad is that nobody knows whose bullet killed them.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of
It's
it's a way of
kind of-
making you kill without knowing that you're killing.
Yeah, it's kind of it's no longer like a physical torture. It's kind of like a physical it's kind of like torture on
It's
the soul,
medicalized, right?
On
Isn't
the
it?
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, by the way, his argument, his formal argument in his first book, Madness and Civilization, when he said we categorize things, right? And we categorize behaviors in psychology. That's the problem with psychology, is that we categorize things. For example, like melancholy and mania, right? We kind of categorize the behavior, where in the past, they don't tend to view these psychological effects as something that is in the past. We're talking about 16th century, 15th century. They don't view that as something that is out of fault of you. These behaviors are in indication of your psychological state, right? So what happened in psychology, and what's the problem with psychology, is that they kind of produce a perverse effect where they kind of categorize the behavior alongside the psychological effect. For example, we have two different um, psychological states, or psychology, like mania and melancholy, right? And we kind of kind of we kind of don't have we kind of don't know the cause of or effect between them, or kind of don't tend to separate between them. If you have a behavior like that, you're having if you have melancholy, that's mean you have a degree of mania and a degree of some kind of you have something, right? You have something wrong, right? You kind of we isolated. But in the past, when we live in the villages, and when we live in when we live in the villages, in cities, in 16th century, 17th century, and yeah, we kind of tend to for example, the ships of fools and the idiot village, right? Like we don't tend to like view these people as like having some like burden on society or these kind of things. This is like a recent phenomenon, you
Uh-huh.
know? And that's what psychology, you know. Basically,
Yeah.
Michel Foucault, in conclusion, said like basically psychologists create their own style, whether the founder of psychology in France, Philippe Pinel, or the founder of psychology in Britain, Samuel Tilk. They each of them took his own style of psychology, right? So I don't know. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know if what Ben actually Ben actually arguing from point of ignorant, you know, and it's complicated, you know. It's even like when I read these things, it's very complicated, you know. It's diverge, you know. It's divergent. It's very complicated.
Yeah.
It's
And there's
oh
obviously
yeah
different when it comes to the gender spectrum. That's obviously a very, very cultural thing because different cultures have had integrated roles for trans people as third gender, as in India there's a role, in Indigenous Americans there's a role, in Indigenous Hawaiian there's a role for trans people. So this is something that's been not just like known about, like, oh, there's some people who identify in a weird way. It's like, no, this is part of it's not even part of like a expression spectrum, because that's a very, I mean, I get why Neil is going from this perspective because it's something that appeals to libertarians. Oh, you're allowed to express yourself however you want. I thought this was America, I can do what I want, right? That's how it's put. But lots of other cultures don't just see it as like, oh, you can kind of do whatever wacky thing you want. It's like
yeah
this is one of the things that people in our society do. This is like an
yeah
important and like necessary role for people to have. Um, yeah, this isn't excluded. This isn't like a weird other thing. We're not just like trying to be nice to people or whatever. This is part of our human society and human experience, and like an actual role.
Relationship of that to biology, meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say,
Right. So this is just confusing how, set theory works, right? So trans women are women, right? Cis women are women, right? Black women are women, but not all women are black. And black women are a subset of women, and they have some differences from the complementary sets of women. Disabled women are women. Women who can't conceive are women, right? Like there's he's just wrong about like set theory. He just needs to go back to like linear algebra or something. This has
yeah
nothing to do with trans people. Doesn't understand English, or I don't know. Yeah.
that's pertain to it's pertain to gender, right? And it's like he kind of like producing. Well, that's the what I'm talking about. He just producing like perversities and
Mm-hmm.
kind of like jeopardize it, and after that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
he kind of shoots futility. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what he do, you know. You know, he doesn't argue for like anything. You
Mm-hmm.
know, he doesn't have anything in the table.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't have anything in there
Yeah.
at all.
say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But
But and this term biological women that they've just made up, it's like
Yeah, they
it's just a
project.
mishmash
Yeah,
of, it's like, okay, you want to teach science, okay, well, uh, you were saying that we should teach about the gender spectrum in sociology, not in science, but now he's saying biological women. This is like a nonsense term that doesn't mean anything. It's just an attempt, again, just to gatekeep biological women, as
yeah.
opposed to android women, I guess, is the differentiation. I'm not sure.
people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true.
Scientifically true that he was just saying that gender spectrum is something you teach in sociology, but now he's saying it's biologically true. So I don't know, just make up your mind. It sounds like, you could put him in a room and argue. He could argue with himself for like a decade, and then maybe he would come out and he would have something to say.
Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological.
Biological women. Okay,
What?
Ben, what are biological women? Are biological women women? I don't know. I don't know what we're talking about here. Yes, this is just try to confuse the issue as much as possible.
Confused, yeah, confused,
Right.
yeah.
Women.
But where are you going with this?
where are you going with this? Yeah, exactly.
What is your what?
Well, what do you have me watching? All right, you're trying to get me. Listen, guys, we're just coming off of getting remonetized from all the craziness. But all right, listen. I'm always here and honest. So when it comes to it, I think there just needs to be a third avenue, right? Just something else. It's completely fine. It doesn't really affect me negatively. There just needs to be something else. I can't wrap my head around it. It's kind of still fully yet, guys.
What are you trying to accomplish?
Right. So the person who's watching is just like, yeah, I don't really know. I don't know what's going on here. And for a lot of the time, honestly, for Ben, that's a win. If somebody who's watching a debate like this can come away thinking, I'm confused by what's going on with trans people, Ben has succeeded by making it seem like it's some complicated thing that you know a normal person can't really understand. And you know what's that? You'll always fear what you don't understand. Was that from? Batman, right?
Yeah. That's the conservative line.
Yeah,
Like,
just try to make it confusing.
Confusing.
That's the final. That's the final tactic. When you don't have anything else, just try to confuse the issue as much as possible.
By asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like why is it bad or?
I mean, that's what Neil was saying is, we should just say it. It's just true. But Ben was the one who's saying, oh, you shouldn't say it in this context. You should say it in this other context. So now he's pivoted to he's kind of retreating more and more. He's pivoted to just where he feels like he can grandstand and just say, because this is his, Ben, I just care about facts TM. So he's saying, I'm just saying true things, but you don't like it. You're offended is what he's saying. He's saying, you're so offended. That's his argument right now. And let's see.
Or wrong. Point out.
I have another way to approach this.
Right.
I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist.
Objectively true.
But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study.
Yeah, that's
he's
interesting
connected
phenomena.
altogether.
Yeah, that's an interesting phenomena, you know? Yeah.
Okay.
It's a transcendental
He's
phenomena in a Kantian way. Or it's basically Kant asked the question to, that in Critique of Pure Reason, how can we reach a synthetical judgment without the aid or before without the aid of experience, or before giving that we have it, given that we have synthetical judgment, right? How the precondition that compel us to have synthetical judgment without empiricism, without experience, right? And that's a phenomena in its own, and that's what the Critique of Pure Reason tried to salvage. The same thing happened here. It's a phenomena that need to be studied, right? And I'm not like the guy, like I'm not I don't know about the subject more about this phenomena. I don't have a nuance thing about this phenomena, but it's a phenomena and you have to study it.
Yeah. And so he's saying so again, he's reaffirming just this is the thing that exists. And why shouldn't we use science to study this, Ben? Why shouldn't we use science, which is a good method for finding out the truth? Why shouldn't we? So he's putting a very strong challenge to Ben, and this kind of wishy-washy, trying to make it confusing is a very strong, clear, direct challenge that Ben has to answer.
He's absolutely tiptoeing. I understand it though, right? But it would be interesting to study if there are swaths of individuals who are now out of nowhere. Not saying that these people have not existed, obviously, but if they are now extremely visible, then yeah, I would say that's an interesting thing to study if you were.
Yeah, and this is why Neil deGrasse Tyson is a fantastic, science communicator and communicator in general. Is he's been able to sum this up in such a straightforward way that somebody who's like, ooh, I'm not even sure about like kind of getting into this topic. This is not really what I usually cover. Somebody sent me this. I'm taking a look, but he's like, oh, yeah, that seems like very straightforwardly, obviously true. It's an interesting phenomenon. Why shouldn't we study it using science? Yeah, that makes sense.
You're a scientist. Does it really, can like science completely back it up? I don't think so. Not yet, at least, right? But I'm sure eventually we'll fully grasp it, right? But all right.
If you want to say it's only sociological,
It leans to that, I
then
think.
it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about.
Yeah, right. So he's taking all of the ways that Ben has tried to kind of twist and contort the issue and be kind of wishy-washy about it to muddle it. And he's saying, like, just look, it doesn't fucking matter. It's like, okay, if it's more, natural sciences, social sciences, I don't know. Let's study it. Like it doesn't really matter what on earth are you talking about, Ben?
Society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say it's not biological, it's just your this. It's real and it's there.
Well,
because it's real because it manifests.
but
That's fair.
Yeah, it's powerful how de-escalatory Neil's approach is. Yeah, exactly.
it is real because it manifests. But the question of how to classify manifestation is a scientific question, meaning that
Okay, so he's back to saying it's science. Ben, make up your mind. You said it's not science, it is science, it's not science, it is science. Okay.
for example, there was a woman over at Brown University. She came out with a study that suggested that there was a phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, in which
Okay, so this is what I read about this
Yeah.
in the comments. It'll be fun. Maybe we can find the study. We don't have to look it up now, but maybe we'll do that. But
He actually,
Yeah, well-
he actually fall to the. Sorry.
oh, just to quickly say, so this study, this rapid onset dysphoria,
Yeah.
the study apparently, I would have to find the study, look at the abstract. We'll see if it's kind of simple to find. But it was basically asking parents, like, did you know that your kid was trans, or did you like find out recently? And they're like, I had no idea. Like suddenly, they're saying that they're trans out of nowhere. And it's like, okay, well that's not a study of anything. It's just a lot of the time parents don't know what's going on with their kids. Like that happens.
Yeah. He he using like the same thing, like he categorized the behavior at the same time the medical thing, and through perverse effect they do
Rapid
the same
onset.
thing.
It sounds scary, right? Rapid onset. Oh no,
it's-
rapid
yeah,
onset.
he-
Dementia.
Yeah.
That's what I think of. Oh God, something
rapid-
terrifying
yeah.
is coming. It's coming right at us suddenly. Ooh.
Yeah, he kind of like doing what Foucault like warned us in the 80s. He kind of do the same thing. And he using like the hierarchical structure of the medicine institution to do that. By the way, he's a libertarian. He contradicts himself. There's a lot of multiple perversities in Ben Shapiro. There's multiple perversities.
Yeah. And this is a conversation I've had a lot of times. This is exactly what you're saying with Foucault. This idea that I think a lot of people have this kind of sense that it's like it's kind of okay to just study whatever, but when it comes to public policy, when you're doing a study and there's going to be policy decisions made based on the outcome of that study, a population that you subject to study, you are subjecting to violence. So here's a very concrete example. So this question of whether gay couples should be able to adopt, the results of that study, it's going to find either that it's same outcomes as mixed-sex couples, worse or better. If it's the same, then they'll say, okay, presumably you're allowed to adopt. It's the same. If it's worse, maybe you don't get to adopt. But here's what will never happen. Let's say it's better than mixed-sex couples. Mixed-sex couples will never lose their right to adopt. So it's highly, highly targeted, violent, and one-sided, because only one outcome will ever have a policy prescription of stopping some population of people from having rights. If it turns out that gay couples have better outcomes for kids, non-gay couples, heterosexual couples are never going to lose those rights.
Yeah.
So it's fundamentally it's dishonest. It's bad faith. It's not fair to simply subject a population simply just to study is to subject them to violence when those policies carry behind.
That's the what we've been fighting for in the left. The 100 years reactionary rhetoric is that there's in Foucault the idea that like we want like more humane like way of like of kind of like treating prisoners, but this humane way is actually under it. There's a history of calculated production of knowledge where knowledge is these like sites of power is actually not for like humane thing. They actually tends for calculating the measures of penal code and the penalty of the crime. It's calculated mathematical thing. It's not actually about humane. Even the French Revolution, when they stated that we want like we don't we want to remove these despotic laws, right? And these like torture by sovereign and punishment by sovereign and by the king. We still have these kind of things, but in different form, manifesting in different form, right? Like rather than like blaming the king or blaming the executioner, you actually not blaming the spectacle is we lost the spectacle of that. We lost it, right? So we don't know who to blame because sovereignty now is under the people. So if you commit a criminal act, you kind of like uh, threaten all the people, the social pact. You threaten all the social bond. That's what happened
Interesting.
here.
Yeah.
You know, that's what happened here. The production of knowledge. It's not about like humanity or these kind of things or human nature. It's about the production of knowledge and calculated knowledge, right? And the technology. You know.
Yeah. And so this was the study that Ben Shapiro is bringing up. Asked transphobic parents, sourced from a transphobic internet forum. So it's basically like, do transphobic parents acknowledge their trans kids? Was the study, and the result was no, they largely don't. But that doesn't tell you anything about trans people.
Which a member of a particular group would suffer from gender dysphoria, and this person's immediate peer group would suddenly have an onset of gender dysphoria. This paper was so controversial that Brown tried to pull it, and then was forced to.
And it says so controversial as opposed to the methodology was shit.
reassign it later. You see this sort of
That's a
treatment
different question.
It is. Like, this is the thing here. This is also fair. I'm going to tell you why, at least from my personal experience, my lived experience at least. So in my family, I have a aunt. I have an aunt who. I have no idea how to even word this. She's a lesbian, okay, and she.
I love this normie guy reacting.
Daughter,
Yeah.
Later on, kind of. Is it became? Guys, my wording is. I'm not political. I'm not super politically correct.
He's a boomer.
Yeah.
He's a boomer.
So my aunt is a lesbian. Her daughter is a lesbian. Her daughter is a lesbian. Okay, her daughter is a lesbian. Her sister is a lesbian. It's like, I think, from what it's looking like at least, right? I think if the person is feeling a certain way, let's say, and another person in their peer group are now like kind of just out, they're talking about these things. Maybe they themselves have always been feeling that way. They just now have the strength, finally, at least, to be exactly who they are, guys. Maybe that's it.
This guy's the fucking goat because he just explained that beautifully. You know this French phrase, "qui se ressemble s'assemble." So those who resemble each other assemble. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's likely, you know, when if you're trans, you're non-binary, the friend group that you gravitate toward in high school is likely they're probably, you know, kind of questioning their own gender as well. And the first person who comes out as gay or as trans, it's likely their friends will follow because they're like, oh shit, like I could do this. Like, you know, you've given me the strength to come out because you're already kind of out there saying like this is possible. And yeah, that could happen very rapidly. So this guy is like even taking the study head on and saying like, let's say that this does happen. Here's like a very plausible, very like common, very kind of human understanding of how this happens, and there's nothing spooky about this at all.
Yeah,
It's just normal
it's kind
human
of
behavior.
like, yeah, it's kind of you profess some kind of human point, right? Because of course I'm kind of like one of the fans of David Hume, a British philosopher, who said like we acknowledge like we make relations. We actually cannot state it the objective truth of external world. You know, it's kind of wrong from his regard, but like he kind of like stated that listen, we are not like we cannot like establish the or affirm the external world, but we have other philosophical relations that like help us help our impressions, right,
Yep.
to understand the world, which these philosophical relations that betwixt impressions and ideas. One one is resemblance, contiguity, the inequality of number, the inequality of proportion, right, and contradiction, right. So yeah, I think you profess some kind of Humean thing, you know, in terms of resemblance, right?
Yeah, I guess. Haven't read much Hume, but I guess that's where I was
Yeah,
going with that. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah, I love how
yeah,
this guy summed it up.
yeah.
But that whatever that paper was, I had never read it, never heard about it, but it sounds excessively logical, at least based off of my lived experience.
Wow, that's great. Yeah.
Was forced to reassign it later. You see this sort of
That's a
treatment of
different
science.
question. What you're asking now is, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically?
Right.
No,
And
there are
is
no
there some
topics.
taboo? And Sam Harris speaks a lot about this.
Yes.
And I think the concern is if you study some topic that's a hot button topic and you bring scientific methods and tools to it, we don't trust. I'm interpreting here. I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms in the face of that information.
Oh,
I think
he's
that's
correct.
the fear.
Well, isn't
Yeah.
that?
Why is
I
that?
mean, and isn't that?
We don't
Why
trust
is that?
our own ability to govern ourselves in the face of what could be some information relative to other
mean,
kinds.
We can easily
Maybe
put
it's
that down.
pertain to liberalism. Maybe it's like the education, you know, because liberal theory views the laws as it are. You don't have the decision making of education because the people who do the laws or who legislate the law are not your decision, right? That's the problem with liberalism and democracy, right? That's the problem with that, you know, because the decision making is not pertain to the parents, but pertain to the person who legislate the education system, right?
But yeah, I mean, what he's saying. This is just what I was saying earlier about, um, you know, if a study comes out that says that um, gay people aren't as good parents as straight people, gay people don't get to adopt. But if a study comes out that says
Yeah,
that straight people aren't as good parents as gay people, nothing happens for them.
yeah,
So this is
yeah.
what he's
Not
talking about. Is our
yeah,
society doesn't just take this information and just, oh, hey, it's just some information, it's just some data,
Yeah.
it's just good to know. No, this gets put into legislation, and it's biased in the ways that our societies are biased. And it's pretty understandable to say, it's like, look, if the only result of this study is like some group of people maybe gets totally fucked over, it's like, I mean, it sucks, yeah, but we also don't just do science like there's no just like objective way that science funding happens or directions of interest in science. This is all subject to, sociological and societal and political structures, right? It's not just even if the research is carried out in an objective way, it doesn't mean that the decision of what to study is somehow just, there's some scientific law of where to direct, a field of study, right?
But in postmodern society, unfortunately, we live on the production of knowledge, and knowledge is power, right? Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Knowledge is the power. In postmodern society, and that's conservative hate to admit, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Like in the United States of America, or just even in the Western world in general, absolutely, science has been used to decimate population.
I mean, what about the science that said that that black women don't feel pain? Echoes to today, where women, and black women especially, are simply just given less pain medication for the same procedures. That's not something that's taught in medical schools as like procedure, but this is a cultural norm that goes back to slavery, that still echoes as like a thing that occurs day to day in our lives. So these kind of like this production of knowledge, yeah, exactly as you're saying, this isn't just some inert thing. This can immediately spring into action in negative ways.
Yeah.
Let's say, all right, say that there are certain groups that are better than other groups because of some fictitious science created by Carl von Linnaeus and Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Guys, let's just
Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an issue.
Yeah, it's not. It means it's not a free society. It's not a society of free inquiry, which I think you need ultimately.
Okay.
But yeah.
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out.
I mean,
Hash it out?
obviously that's not his approach, right? Because the science is when it comes to climate change. There's nothing for you to hash out, Ben.
I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides
What is your motivation?
why does that matter?
It matters because if you have political power, you could end up creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms as you. The history of that exercise.
That's a kind of rhetorical point, That's what I'm talking about, like, yeah, he's now questioning the subject in front of him. Neil deGrasse Tyson questioning the subject in front of him, and
I think that's fair, and I think that's fair to do at this point in the conversation. And for Ben to play dumb and say like, "Oh, what me? No, I couldn't possibly have motives. I'm not a human with motivated reasoning. I'm a perfectly logical android."
I'm with democracy. I'm with education. Like that's the same bullshit 100 years ago when Edmund Burke writing reflection on the French Revolution. His reflection when he was in the Whig Party in Britain, right? Guys, I'm with like democracy. I'm with the right of man, but try to think about it a little bit. It's not. It's
or the phrenologists, who are saying, oh, you see these structures in the brain. This is why black people are more servile. Oh, I'm just a servant of science. I'm just learning about the world. No, obviously, this is motivated reasoning.
The history of which exercise, bring out all this.
Guys, this is an amazing conversation. Obviously, they are absolutely on two different sides, but I love the fact that there are people here, that there are two individuals sitting down right now, different angles, coming at things differently, but they're able to have an intelligent conversation without screaming at each other, listening, comprehending, and then just responding calmly.
The science and let's hash it out.
I'm saying if you bring out all the science and the politicians hash it out, the history of that exercise is a recipe for disaster if it involves discoveries that put people's freedom as defined in our Constitution at risk.
Well
But
played.
now you're arguing for limitations on areas of particular study.
No, I'm arguing we need.
Yes, actually. Oh God, this is crazy. All right, so Neil deGrasse Tyson is right. Historically, we absolutely have done that, right? But then Ben Shapiro is also right because he's in fact arguing for limitations because then we can't. Oh, this is great.
Need
Let's
a
go.
way to shield. We need a way to protect people's freedoms in the face of whatever gets discovered scientifically.
Okay.
So
I'll give it.
I mean, I agree. I think that's what the Constitution is for, is to guard rights from.
But we're always
I mean, that's why-
fighting people who want rights are always fighting others who are saying they don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily challenge on the progressive left. It is a daily challenge, right? Here's an example.
progressive
I forgot how I ended up getting this phone call. It was some magazine that serves the gay community. And they want, I remember why, because they wanted my opinion on, they wanted my opinion about whether being gay was biological or mental.
Right, there's that new study that came out, this vast
or
study.
psychological.
Right,
okay?
right.
And I said, I don't care which it is.
I don't either. Personally, bro. I have family members who are like in that community, bro. Like it. I don't. Listen, I went to a lesbian wedding, like last month, 2 months ago. I don't care. I don't care. All right. Great food. All right. Good music. I don't care. I don't.
Right, because it's if you say I don't know if Neil is a progressive, but I mean he's arguing for the progressive side extremely effectively. I mean, this is like some of the best rhetoric I've seen out of somebody arguing for trans rights, you know, in a long time. He's doing it in this like unbelievably just like sharp and de-escalatory manner that just leaves no room for contention. I mean, he's bulldozing Ben in like the most most incredible way. Welcome to the channel. Yeah. I mean, so this question of like, you know, okay, we all know how this plays out, right? If we learn that being gay is biological, then the conservatives will say, oh, it's biology. It's some kind of like fucked up mutation. Maybe there's a medication that we can reverse this. If we say, oh, it's psychological, it's like, see, it's all in their head. It's not real. The only refuge is left to say, oh, I'm this in my soul. And their response to that is, what, you idiot? You believe in souls? That's what the Christian right will say to any of those positions. There's no outcome in which they won't argue that your rights don't exist.
Yeah. Even Jude Butler took this position, not the soul, but took this position. How, you know, I believe that like people, you know, individuals, you know, perceived, you know, on the literal meaning, perceived themselves, you know, like it's about performativity, you know, and she has a very sophisticated, you know, view about gender, which is a performative thing that you do, right? Like she make an example of the sissy boys who like get bullied, you know, during the school, you know, and she viewed that there's a kind of a psychological institution that kind of undermine people, you know, certain people, right, and kind of put the law before it's instituted, right? It's kind of we recourse to the production of power, right? Even at the end of the day, even prison reformists in the 18th century, they actually like you know, they institute the things that we try to fight in terms of the death penalty, right? In terms of death penalty, ending of like the death penalty, right? They actually like instituted that, whether like justice court, whether like more humane, the idea of focusing about more humane way of like, you know, uh, punishing someone, right? These things are not like for the sake of humanity or humane thing, not the word, but actually the production of knowledge, the calculated and mathematical, way of like thing, at the
It's
end
a
of the
form
day,
of
these,
control.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of.
I don't even think about the fact that you are dating someone or you're married to someone who is like who's just like you, bro. I don't care. Are you a decent human? All right, I like you then. That's it, bro. I don't know. I don't know, guys. I just don't care.
It,
Right. It's like saying like like I think it's an abomination for you to date somebody who's basic because I wouldn't be into somebody who's basic. Like, right. That's what homophobia is basically. It's like why do you care what it is that you see in somebody unless it's like the only interesting thing about somebody is that they're like a Nazi, then you might be like, hey, why are you dating them? Like, is it just because they're a Nazi? Like, that's kind of weird. But in general, yeah.
find out what it is, fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on legislations or laws. Because, for example, suppose it said it's purely biological, okay? Then you say, oh, that explains it. Suppose it says it's purely psychological. What are you going to do now? You say, well, now you're going to go to the reorientation camps or whatever those are called,
Right,
where they
right.
realign you because they say it's psychological rather than biological.
Yeah, you're crazy.
Exactly.
All of a sudden, people start behaving in ways in society
Yeah.
that want to constrict the freedom of expression of who and what people are. And that is a danger. So maybe there needs to be a line in the sand. Let science do what it does, but politicians keep us free. Yet there's so many politicians that are doing the opposite of that.
So why aren't you a libertarian? I mean,
Right, and then that's the final
yeah,
thing is to
yeah,
say,
yeah.
well, you agreed with me all along, come into my camp, even
Yeah,
though
come on,
everything. I mean,
please,
that's
please.
just that's the
Yeah,
saddest.
come.
saddest
I am libertarian. I'm libertarian. Please come and like he's not a libertarian. He's standard conservative. Like I hate this fucking American politics when some figures on the right? They
Yeah.
said like I'm a liberal Zionist. Like I'm a liberal Zionist. It's
Yeah.
come on. You're a neoconservative. That's it. That's it. Like maybe ah.
Yeah.
It's a yeah.
Yeah, libertarians are 99% of the time they're conservatives without enough of a backbone to say they're conservative, and 1% of
Yeah.
the time they're really really nerdy people who are really really interested in kind of like niche political philosophy, and that's great, and I love talking to people like that. But
Yeah.
most of the
Yeah.
time in like American politics, somebody says they're libertarian, they're just conservative, but they're trying to wheedle out of it.
like, I'm a libertarian. Come over here. Just
Okay.
Yeah, he does kind of sound like a libertarian.
the line is right here.
I'm a
Just join
libertarian.
me.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he does, but Ben doesn't because he's trying to use the government to control and take away people's freedom, which is kind of an interesting thing for a libertarian to do. Seems a little bit out of character.
Over here.
All right, so I definitely wish I would have encountered a little bit more of Ben Shapiro's overall talking point, so I can understand kind of where he's coming from on this angle. Instead, we basically got multiple monologues from Neil deGrasse Tyson speaking, extremely logical here. I've really seen nothing wrong with his statements here. Logic, and then Ben Shapiro is also giving logic from a different standpoint here. They're both speaking honestly, clearly, intelligently. What was it that I was supposed to find in this video that I don't know, guys. They're both.
Hey, Wiggle, welcome.
Wiggle, how are you, Wiggle?
What's up? I'm
What's up?
You guys watching?
Can you turn up your mic a little bit? Yeah, just so if you do chime in.
What are you guys are
Oh,
watching?
that's good. Yeah. So we're watching this guy, Mr. L. Boyd, reacting to Neil deGrasse
Ben
Tyson talking to
Shapiro.
Ben Shapiro about transgenderism,
Ben
because I
Shapiro.
wanted to see, this guy seems like, yeah, kind of a normie boomer. So kind of see like what is his perspective on these kind of people having almost like an internet, conversation. And yeah, reaction to a reaction.
I mean, there's got to be antagonism because it's like an older black man who's bald having to watch a black man with a full head of hair that's old. So there's got to be a little bit.
It's tough, but he still agreed with Neil, so that's got to say something, right?
Damn, solidarity's still strong. I know I'd be bitter if I lost my hair and I was looking at someone older than me. No.
I mean, he doesn't seem like he'd be that, because he's got like the smooth, right? If he was trying to like fluff it up and like cover as much of his head with whatever hair he had left, I think he was like more.
Yeah, comb over shit.
Yeah. It seems like he seems pretty. He seems pretty comfortable with his hairless head. Hairless top of his head. He's got a nice
Such
beard.
a weird still of Ben Shapiro. He just looks so happy.
He looks like like one of those what are they called, the dolls with the ventriloquist dolls. Yeah. I mean, this was really like a masterclass from Neil on just how to bulldoze somebody throwing weird ass talking points at you. Because I mean, he just BTFO'd Ben on like every single thing that he was saying. Kind of took him to school, in a very, somebody in chat said like a very de-escalatory way. That he's not saying that he's dumb. He's not saying his arguments are dumb. He's just reframing, and saying like, look, we care about freedom. Not taking away people's freedom from the government, from what we learned from some scientific study, which has happened before. That's a problem. There needs to be a line to stand. Yeah, good faith destruction. Great way of describing it. And he's saying like, look, some of the things that you're saying doesn't really matter. Do we study this in natural science versus social science? Who really cares? It's interesting to study, and it's a fact that people are trans. I mean, pretty.
Yeah, he kind of take the angle of like enlightenment, like view, which is like, and I don't have anything against it, but like he take the enlightenment view of things, Conservative, by the way, conservatives are like even since Edmund Burke, they are anti-enlightenment, they're in category, even in political science literature, conservatives are early conservatives are anti-enlightenment, they have some kind of like, we have to be cautious, this idea about we have to be cautious about like enlightenment, like ideas, like that's the early conservative thinkers.
Interesting.
Speaking logically, if you can get science to prove that one thing is in fact that people like each other, that are the same because of something here, and then they try to cure it, or then they start to do all these other crazy things that have nothing to do with anything. Let these people live their life, bro. That's it. That's where I'm at mentally. And this is not someone
liberal.
This is
He's a liberal. He's a liberal.
That's what I mean here. This is me literally just speaking to you how I would speak to my literal best friend.
Liberals
right?
always
Look,
love circle jerking
bro,
over.
I just seriously don't
let people
care.
do what they want.
Yeah.
And it's like the worst is that they have to say it, but like everyone in their society already agrees. But like they're like waiting for like the audience to be like, damn, that's so reasonable.
He's so reasonable. He said Ben did a good job. He said Neil did a good job. Everybody did a good job.
He said that like he respects, he doesn't agree with you, but he respects your right to disagree. And that's so reasonable. You know what? Like, that's what we need in the world, is more people that are just like bystanders.
Bystander party. this year, go to the polls. Everybody should go to the polls. Don't necessarily vote, but go to the polls. Get in the booth.
Yeah.
If anything calls out to you, maybe fill in a circle. But if it doesn't, that's cool. You did your job. You showed up.